Welcome to our AFP webinar live stream, Growing Recurring Revenue in 2026, Building for a New Era of Sustainable Giving, sponsored by CharityEngine. My name is Ryan, and I'll be the operator for the presentation today. We are joined today by our speaker, Dave Raley. Dave is the founder of Imago Consulting, an advisory firm that helps organizations create growth through innovation. As a speaker and advisor, he has inspired thousands of nonprofit leaders to grow both personally and organizationally. He's the author of The Rise of Sustainable Giving. Dave also writes a weekly innovation and leadership column called The Wave Report and hosts the Sustainable Giving podcast, a show that shines a light on what's working in sustainable giving. At this time, I would like to turn the microphone over to Dave Martin with CharityEngine to begin today's webinar.
All right, welcome everyone. My name is Dave Martin. I'm the Vice President of Marketing with CharityEngine, and we're so excited to sponsor this great AFP webinar today with Dave Raley. Dave, you want to go ahead into the next slide for me? Just a little bit on CharityEngine. I'll take 2 seconds. So CharityEngine is an all-in-one nonprofit CRM. So think about it. All of your data is in one place. All the tools that you need to do fundraising is all in one place. You don't have to deal with duct tape solutions and imports and exports and all of that. And it's one scalable platform as well. So you can start small and grow large. You're not going to outgrow our platform. And lastly, the key thing about CharityEngine we like to say is that we're 100% privately owned and self-funded. We're not private equity backed, and you won't be pushed off our platform because of a software being acquired by an organization and then being sunset. So it's one of our key things that we like to say. Also, from a monthly giving perspective, we're the monthly giving CRM. So we see recurring giving as a growth engine. Monthly donors, they give more over time, they stay longer, and they create predictable revenue for you. Retention beats acquisition, so it costs far less to keep a sustainer than it does to replace one. And recurring programs dramatically reduce your donor churn. Dave's going to talk a lot about this, but we like to reinforce it as a sponsor here and what our software does for you guys. Payment failures are silent revenue killers. Think about expired cards, soft declines. They just drain your monthly programs, especially if you don't catch them quickly. And then lastly, we're built to protect your revenue. CharityEngine combines smart retries, automated card updating, real-time monitoring, all of these things, and we guarantee a 90% plus collection rate on your recurring giving for all your recurring gifts. No other vendors in the space can do that. It's our secret sauce, and that's why we're here, and we love partnering with Dave. And so I think I've said enough. I'm going to hand it over to Dave, and thanks everyone for joining the webinar.
Thanks, Dave. By the way, hello, everybody. It has been super fun seeing where everyone's dialing in from in the chat. If you haven't done that, go ahead and add where you're dialing in from. I personally am dialing in from just outside of Seattle, Washington, home of the newest Super Bowl champions, the Seattle Seahawks. Thank you very much, all my New England friends. We love you too. You got to win the last one, the last Super Bowl when we faced the Patriots. But no, it's just really good to be with everybody today. And I want to ask you a question. As you think about sustainability in your charity, what does it look like if we were to build for a new era of sustainable generosity? Today, we're going to talk about a number of really trends that we're seeing in the space. Really some of the things that have developed even just in the last year, and then what we can do about it. But as Dave mentioned, as the team was so gracious, many of you had the chance to actually be on this seminar 1 year ago, almost exactly today, for the release of The Rise of Sustainable Giving, which just came out almost exactly 1 year ago today. And it has been an incredible journey. We estimate that between the book and the opportunity to launch our Sustainable Giving podcast, conferences, shout out AFP Icon. So cool to have folks come to Seattle and be together. We estimate we were in front of about 25,000 nonprofit leaders over this last year. And I'm humbled by that. It's incredible. I think it's really a sign of the topic and how this is a wave that charity leaders are wanting to take advantage of, understand, and move into. And so it's been a super fun journey, but we're just getting started because as you'll hear today, there's over 1 million charities today in the US alone that have been left behind when it comes to growing strong, resilient, recurring giving, but not anymore. And so that's the theme of our time today. And I'm going to share some of the things that we've picked up on over the last year. Hey, everybody. Sorry about that. Welcome to online streaming in 2026. We are back online. So I just was saying before we jumped offline there for a second, it's been really a powerful journey. We've had over 25,000 leaders exposed to the message of sustainable giving this last year, and we're just getting started. And one of the things that we are going to share here at the end of our time, so you're going to want to stick around, is actually the folks at CharityEngine have graciously agreed to give 100 free copies of the new audiobook that just released to attendees who are with us. And so stick around. You'll have a chance to enter that because I don't know about you, but a good audiobook is my preferred way to consume this kind of content. So what we're going to talk about today is fundamentally three things. We're going to talk about what's changed in recurring giving, not just over the past decades, but also even in the past year or two. We're going to talk about where to focus now. If you're a nonprofit leader and you're thinking, okay, yep, this is for me, where do we focus? And we're going to talk about how technology can help or hinder our approach to really scaling recurring giving. So let's start with this question, and I would love to hear from you in the chat. Where are you at in your sustainable giving journey? So I would love you to just put in the chat, are you just starting to explore sustainable giving? Is this something that's on your radar, but it's not a core focus right now? Are you just getting started? You know, you're underway, you're starting to make activities. It's a priority for 2026, but you haven't quite fully, dove in and matured. Or have you started already and you're looking to grow? And likewise, for those of you that have substantial programs or a good, strong base, what are you looking to scale? So I love to get a quick read on folks. All right, I see different categories: just launching, looking to grow, looking to scale, just getting started. Yeah, a few of those, looking to grow. I love this. Keep it coming. Okay, some scales there. Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is thrilling to me because a year ago today, folks were a lot more folks were in the exploration stage. Like, I think this might be for me. But today, to see so many of you that are already just getting started, right? You've made it a priority for 2026, or you are looking to really grow your program, or even scale your program, is encouraging, because the reality is charity leaders are at every different stage in their development. And it's important to understand where you stand today if you want to get to where you want to go. So let's talk about what's changed. I think of the first time that I entered into this sector, and the first organization that I ever got to do professional fundraising work with was an organization that was a social services charity based in Los Angeles called Union Rescue Mission. I'm sure some of you are familiar with Union Rescue Mission. It's the oldest rescue mission social services charity in Los Angeles, and one of the largest in the US. And having grown up in Southern California, having volunteered downtown throughout my childhood, it was pretty cool to get my first professional job working in marketing and fundraising for charities, working with the folks at Union Rescue Mission. And I remember two things about that experience. The very first program that I ever worked on was a recurring monthly giving program. This is the early 2000s. And I remember that it was a ton of work. I remember how I was the one pulling the data and doing the data matching and printing out letters and fulfillment letters and match letters, and really trying to operate that program on a month-to-month basis. And the second thing I remember was how vaguely frustrating it was, because the reality was, for Union Rescue Mission and for social services charities in general in that time, recurring giving was not really available. And so this program for union recognition that we worked so hard on amounted to less than 5% of the organization's revenue. And I remember that being discouraging, not just because of the work that I was putting into it, but it was discouraging because we deserved better. And because the work that the mission was doing was so important, and it just ultimately wasn't something that donors were stepping into. And in fact, the other thing that was discouraging about it was that the face of homelessness had really begun to change in Los Angeles. People tended to think of the homeless at that time as the grizzled veteran on the corner, or the drug addict, or the mental health patient. And while that is a proportion of the folks that Union Rescue Mission served, the reality was that more than 50% of the guests that Union Rescue Mission were serving were women, children, and families. And they were women like Sarah, who had a chance to spend some time with, intelligent young lady who, through really no fault of her own, had been pushed over the edge into homelessness in Los Angeles County. At that time, by the way, in LA, I think to afford a minimum standard of living in Los Angeles County required somebody like Sarah to work 3 full-time jobs just to have a minimum standard of living. And so, but because of the generous acts of donors and because of Union Rescue Mission, they had been able to open a center called Hope Gardens Family Center outside of the core of LA. And Sarah and her son Elijah were able to get out of the streets, get some stability, do some job training. Sarah could go to interviews. Elijah could have childcare and access to education, and get back on their feet. And the reality was that 20 years ago, the vast majority of charities were unable to build strong, growing, resilient, recurring giving programs like Union Rescue Mission. In fact, and if you've heard me talk before, you'll understand that there have been really 3 types of sustainer programs. And I really want to set the groundwork here, because this is where we're going to grow from. And so if you've heard this before, see where you find yourself in these 3 types of sustainer programs. And if you haven't heard this before, I want you to kind of think about, where do we fall in terms of what we might be able to do in terms of our recurring giving. The first type of recurring giving program really historically has been what I would refer to as a one-to-one recurring giving program. That is where the donor and the beneficiary are paired up in some way. So the donor gives, and they, in some way, know the beneficiary who receives the benefits. A classic version of that in history has been the idea of like child sponsorship, where a donor sponsors the charity, pairs them up with a specific child that's benefiting from services. Another example in faith-based organizations would be the idea of missionary support or staff support, where the donor gives and they're actually in some way, directly or indirectly, paired up with the beneficiary who receives. And this has been the gold standard of recurring giving historically for charities that can do a one-to-one model. But there's a problem. And the problem is the vast majority of charities don't have the programs, infrastructure, services, or infrastructure to support or to use a one-to-one recurring giving model. Which really brings us to, the second category of recurring giving, which historically is what I would refer to as membership. Membership is where the donor is at least partially the beneficiary of the programs and services that the organization provides. So think about your local zoo or museum or arts institution or aquarium or public television or public radio. Many of you are listening to today and you think, yeah, our services, we develop programming, and our services actually directly in some ways benefit our donors. Well, you might actually lend yourself towards a membership style recurring giving program. But once again, there's a problem. The vast majority of charities don't have the programs, services, or infrastructure to support a membership style recurring giving program. In fact, your donors are not your beneficiaries. Your beneficiaries are somewhere else. They're a disadvantaged population. They're in another place or in another space. And so membership is not an option for the vast majority of charities. That has historically led to the third type of recurring giving program, which is literally everybody else. This is the left behind category. These are the charities that have historically not been able to tap into recurring giving. This is Union Rescue Mission, early 2000s. This was my first role. This is many of the charities that I've worked with over the years that historically it's kind of basically a checkbox on the website or a check writing program, but it's not fundamentally something that leaders have been able to take advantage of. And so I want you to think for a moment, where might you be in that one of those three categories? Because the reality is the vast majority of nonprofits have not historically been able to build large, growing, recurring giving programs. In fact, if you do the math, in the US alone, there are 1.5 million 501c3s. And of those, my estimate is about 3/4 of those, or 1.1 million nonprofits, have been left behind. And this is the thing that fires me up. But we've got good news. Regardless of which category you're in, there's an opportunity. So I would love to hear in the chat, where do you find yourself? I see a few membership, everyone else, one-to-one, everyone else, everyone else, everyone else. Where do you find yourself? Do you see your organization as able to tap into a one-to-one model? Or are you more aligned towards membership where you're actually providing some sort of benefit, tangible or intangible, to your donors? Or are you in that third category? Okay. Yeah. One-on-one, one-to-one, or everyone else. Yep. There are some organizations, by the way, you might be in multiple categories. There's a hint. Yeah. Organizations, everyone else, about right. So it seems like of our audience today, we're probably at about 80% are in the everyone else category. But as I mentioned, the good news is regardless of which category you're in, there are two forces that are reshaping philanthropy that make recurring giving more possible for more charities, including one-to-one style charities, including membership style charities, and including that last category of everyone else. So those two trends are, and the first one is, we'll really breeze through this one because you've guessed it, subscriptions. Subscriptions have really interacted with pretty much every area of our consumer and business lives. They're everywhere. So are you a subscriber? Really, subscriptions are in our entertainment lives. They're in our personal finances. They're in our grocery shopping. They're in our vehicle usage. We've got folks that are subscribed. If you would have told me 10 years ago, Dave, that you would be subscribed to the doorbell company, by the way, I don't know if any of you subscribe to your doorbell, but I still, to this day, I made that joke, by the way. And then my wife was like, hey, when you travel, I don't like to know, if the Amazon package got dropped off or whatever. And so now we subscribe monthly to the doorbell company to be able to get notifications every time somebody walks by the front door. And so the reality is subscriptions are everywhere. 95.8% of US adults have at least one subscription, and the average American in the US today has 12 subscriptions. In fact, when asked how much they spend on subscriptions on a monthly basis, the average American underestimated how much they spent on subscriptions by $133 a month. Some of you saw this the last time I shared, and you're like, that's $1,600 a year that the average American is spending on subscriptions that they don't even realize. In fact, in that same study, they found that 42% of Americans said that they had forgotten that they were still being charged for a subscription that they no longer use. By the way, moment of honesty, who's in the 42%? My hand is up, by the way. I wrote a book on subscriptions and giving, and I still find subscriptions that are like, wait a second, I'm not still using that. So you're not alone. In fact, we have subscriptions today that you can subscribe to monitor your subscriptions so that you don't find yourself subscribed to things that you didn't realize you were subscribed to. By the way, for anybody who uses Rocket Money, this is one of the main apps that is out there. It includes philanthropic giving. So giving to your charity on a recurring basis actually shows up in apps like this. And they will send emails to your donors saying, hey, are you sure you still want to give such and such an organization this monthly amount? Right. And so you can see this confluence where subscriptions and giving are even coming together in some of these unconventional ways. The truth is that subscriptions are big because while they've provided value and there have been very many great subscriptions, they've also been good for business. This is a chart that shows subscription-oriented businesses, which is the dark blue line, against the general market over the last dozen years. And over the last 12 years, subscription-oriented organizations have outgrown the general market by more than 4 times. So you didn't come here today to learn about the subscription economy. You could look at your own bank account. But the reason this matters is because together, the subscription economy is real, but donor behavior is also changing. And this is the landscape that I think presents a massive opportunity for us today. First of all, 52% of millennials said that they would be more likely to give monthly over a large one-time donation. And for those of you fundraisers who are thinking, yes, but what about our baby boomer and Gen X donors? The reality is 49% of all baby boomer and Gen X donors are already enrolled in a monthly giving program. So this is not a trend that's coming. This is a trend that's here today. It's the reality of how donors are behaving today, and increasingly so. We also know that donors are more valuable on a recurring basis. They retain at much higher rates than the average single gift donor. They give much more over the long term. When you look at 5-year LTV, which is the typical number that we use, you see they give anywhere from 5 to 7 times that of their single gift counterparts. They're also much more likely to make estate gifts, 6 times more likely to make a legacy gift than their single gift counterparts. So they make for wonderful planned giving prospects. They're also some of the most generous donors that your organization has. We find that on average, the average recurring donor gives 25% in addition to whatever their annual recurring giving is. And so if you're bringing in $100,000 a year, you should see $25,000 in additional gifts from those same recurring donors. If you're bringing in $10 million a year, you should see $2.5 million in additional gifts coming from these donors if you're cultivating them right. And so they are some of the most generous donors that we have, and we know they cost less to cultivate and retain. So donors are more likely to become sustainers or to subscribe to the services or causes they prefer. Taken all together, I refer to this as subscription giving. Now, to be clear, what I'm not saying is that we're trying to turn our donors into subscribers. We're not trying to turn philanthropy or generosity into a consumer trend. But what I am saying is that this consumer trend has paved the way for a change in donor behavior and generosity. And there are lessons that we can pull from the world of subscriptions to help inspire that generosity and meet donors where they're at and grow that. In fact, I did some math as a part of the research for the book on what is the opportunity in philanthropy, in individual giving, if we're able to take advantage of this. And if we see just a limited 5% growth from just those charities that have been left behind in individual giving over the next 10 years, that represents $119 billion in additional generosity to impact the causes that are here today. And the reality is, by the way, I subsequently have learned in conversations with the folks over at the Data Commons at Giving Tuesday that this was a conservative estimate. They did their own math and came to a conclusion that sustainable recurring giving represented somewhere between 10 and $20 billion a year. So somewhere between 100 and $200 billion over the next decade. And so this is a massive opportunity. It's one that's here today, and it's one that we need to take advantage of. But at the end of the day, this is not about dollars. This is about people like Sarah and Elijah and you and me and the work that we exist to accomplish in this world and enabling that work. And so I want to bring that back to how are we going to actually accomplish the mission that our organization has? And the next topic is really, where do we focus on now? So as I've talked to leaders over the last year and really thought deeply and worked with a number of organizations to grow sustainable giving, I've got several things that I want to share as far as if I were in your shoes, not knowing where you're at, what level of maturity. Some of you are just getting started. Some of you are looking to grow and scale. what are fundamentally 4 things that I would focus on at this stage in development for recurring giving. The first thing that I want you to think about is own it. What do I mean by own it? First of all, one of the biggest issues right now in recurring giving is it's not owned internally at organizations. Recurring giving is everybody's responsibility, air quotes, right? And if it's everybody's responsibility, then it's nobody's responsibility. And so the question I want you to consider first is, who is responsible for recurring giving in your organization? Do you have somebody that's responsible and accountable for growing recurring giving in your organization? And then a very close second question is, do they actually have the resources and the influence they need to make a difference? Now, I realize those of you listening are at wildly different stages. I've got clients that have, um, 500 monthly donors, that have 50 monthly donors. I also have clients that we work with that have 50,000 monthly donors and 100,000 monthly donors. And so this is going to look different for every organization. But I would suggest to you, you've really got to own sustainable giving in your organization, and you have to create ownership. And that involves who's responsible for this. And for some of you, that may mean, hey, I'm the executive director and I'm responsible for this, because once we build a base, then we're going to be able to grow. And so the first thing I want you to think about is, what does it look like to own it? The second thing I want to talk about is prioritize it. So the first question I have for you is, not only is recurring giving a priority for you and your organization internally, but do your donors know that sustainable giving is a priority? The number of organizations we work with, one of the first things we do when they come to us and say, hey, we want to help create growth in our recurring giving program. It's super important to us. And then we'll go to their website and recurring giving is nowhere to be found. Or we'll check, how they communicate to donors, and recurring giving barely comes up except for in a PS in the third email in the welcome series. And so not only is it a priority at your organization, but do your donors know it's a priority? Because some of this is just visibility. I think we've bought into this idea that the default giving option is a one-time, and that's the assumption. You're going to give a one-time gift. And then the question is, would you consider upgrading, or would you consider converting over to recurring giving? And the reality is, more and more organizations are leading with sustainer first fundraising. I'll give you a very good resource on the Sustainable Giving podcast, which is our podcast. This last season, just a couple of months ago, I interviewed Sofia Machado Lemus from Operation Smile. Operation Smile, more than 5 years ago, decided to make recurring giving a priority at the organization, and she shares their journey of how they prioritized it, some of the pitfalls along the way, some of the bumps along the way, and how that ultimately has led them to being a sustainer first organization that sees a substantial percentage of their income each year now coming in renewable, recurring ways. And so, do you lead with recurring is another question. Is recurring ultimately just something that you do once a year, that you occasionally mention as an offhand comment? Or is it something that you actually look to lead with at least occasionally? And so, not only do we think about how are we going to own recurring giving in our organization, how are we going to prioritize it, but the next thing I want to talk about is, how do we make it visible? So, how can donors see that recurring giving is not only a priority, but is something that is actually the center of the folks that are making philanthropy and generosity possible for your organization? So, can they find your program? We talked about your website. Is the recurring giving on the homepage? I'm a huge advocate for putting it right up front. If you look at some of these organizations, Operation Smile, Charity Water, International Justice Mission as a couple of examples, you will find recurring giving, even the form to begin your recurring gift, on the homepage. What are you doing to make it visible? How are you communicating that? Is it included prominently and regularly in communications? So many organizations have been in a historical pattern of, we, do a direct mail piece, every January, or We mention it once, in the third email of the welcome series. So is it really a core part of your identity? Because if it's a core part of your identity, then donors can see it as a core part of their identity. And what are you doing in terms of new donor onboarding? One of the things we just held this past a little over a week ago, we had 22 organizations come to Seattle and spend 2.5 days with us in our sustainable giving workshop. And we spent 2.5 days going really deep. And one of the things we focused on heavily is what are we doing in our new donor onboarding? Because the reality is, the most likely window for a donor to convert to recurring giving is actually in the first 30 days of their first gift. And when I say that, I think that a lot of folks actually are surprised by that and maybe even a little nervous. Like, wait a second, if a donor gives their first gift, you're saying you should ask them within 30 days to become a part of the recurring giving program, of the sustainer program? Short answer is yes. The long answer is there are some very specific ways to do that. We cover that in the book. We talk about that in the workshop. And we want to make sure that new donors from the get-go are seeing the opportunity to give to the charity and make an ongoing impact. One other thing on new donor onboarding, we see that not only is it within the first 30 days, but my hypothesis is the reason that is the case is because donors is really a two-part hypothesis. I think donors are most likely to convert to recurring when they're new, because number one, that is when they're at their height of interest. They just were moved to give to support you, either in relation to a disaster or something that you've communicated or something they saw or something that happened in their life. So their awareness is not only at the height, but their emotional level of commitment to the cause is at a high. And then I think the second reason donors are willing to give to organizations on a recurring basis when they're new is because they haven't settled into any patterns yet. Like they haven't developed a habit of I give once a year in the holidays, right? This is an opportunity. And so for you, those of you that are here in February, you brought in donors at year end. Now's the time to invite them to make an ongoing impact in the organization. Okay, so own it. Do we have ownership within the organization? Prioritize it. Have we prioritized it? And can donors tell? Which leads us to making it visible, making your program even findable. And then the last one I want to mention today, as far as what we can do, and then we're going to talk about some specific opportunities with technology, is to benchmark it. The way I like to say this is that you can't get to where you want to go until you understand where you are today. And so we need to understand where our numbers are today. And so I have two questions I want you to think about with regards to benchmarking and understanding where you stand today with recurring giving. Those two questions are how many and how much. How many recurring donors do we have today that are active? They've given a recurring gift in the last fiscal year, in the last period of time. And how much are they giving? And bonus points if you articulate how much in terms of what we refer to as ARR and MRR. If you're familiar with the subscription industry, you'll understand the terms ARR and MRR, which stand for annual recurring revenue and monthly recurring revenue. Subscriptions live and die on what is our annual recurring revenue and our monthly recurring revenue, and how is that trending. One of my favorite things to do when we have the opportunity to consult directly with an organization is every month we're watching that MRR number. And we want to see that MRR number moving in the right direction. And the beauty of monthly recurring revenue is it's sticky, right? We have that high retention rate. And so understanding not only where we stand today, but how we're progressing, or sometimes flat or declining, is super powerful to help us to understand where we can go. And so how many recurring donors do we have today? How much are they giving on a monthly and annual basis? And my favorite metric of all, and I think one of the most important metrics, but also one of the least understood, is long-term value. And that is because we know that on average, 97% of the giving that will come from your recurring donors takes place after their first recurring gift. Let me repeat that. 97% of the giving that comes from your recurring donors actually takes place after the first gift. And so, what are we doing to not only cultivate and care for those donors, but also we can actually start to do some math. So, we just, every time we work with an organization, we look at not only what's happening right now and in year in terms of the value, but also how much long term value is generated. So just as an example, I was looking just yesterday at a couple of recent clients that we've been working with, and we always project our goal, our plan is to get at least a 2-to-1 return in short term, so 12-month value. But what we always want to see is anywhere from a 10-to-1 return or better. And so just was looking yesterday, and over the last several organizations we've had a chance to work with, they're seeing anywhere from a 2-to-1 to a 16-to-1 return in short-term value. But then when you look at long-term value, we're seeing anywhere from an 11-to-1 return, so $11 raised for every dollar spent, to a 55-to-1 return. And so these are the kinds of metrics that are possible when we really prioritize and have a plan to grow recurring giving. Okay, so what are we doing to own it? What are we doing to prioritize recurring giving within the organization? How are we making it visible? And I think that's very dependent on who you are, what your channels are, what your communications are, but is it really truly visible? Or is it sort of relegated to one spot in the year or one spot on the website? How are we making it visible? And where do we stand today and where might we go? The last area I want to cover before we close, and we'll do the audiobook giveaway and some other things. I've got a resource we put together for everybody, is let's talk about technology, because the truth is technology can help or hurt your ability to scale recurring giving. In fact, the way I like to think about it is this: technology is not going to grow your program. I've got a digital background. The reality is there is no silver bullet technology. There is no magic button tech that you can get that will just magically grow your program. However, technology can either be your biggest barrier or your best ally to scaling recurring giving, to scaling giving. It can either help and really help you scale in a significant way, or it can get in the way. And so in the book, I talk about the core elements of what I call the sustainable giving tech stack. So when you think about your tech stack, specifically that's supporting recurring giving, there are a number of core elements of that tech stack that we work through. And really, for our purposes today, I want you to focus on the first 3 elements, which are really the core, inner core, most important decisions that you can make for your organization's ability to scale recurring giving. And so that starts with your CRM or donor management system. That is the most critical building block, the most important decision you'll make, and also the one you don't want to get wrong, because that's the one that takes the most resources to change, to even implement right. And so you want to really make a good decision around your CRM or donor management system. The second piece of that puzzle is the donation platform, and that is what powers your donation experience. Donors actually experience when they interface, what you do when you can set up donation pages, and so on and so forth. And then the third piece, which a lot of people don't realize is actually a third piece of technology, because it's often related to the second piece, is what your donation processor. And that is what is actually doing the processing of the transactions and payments. Now, some platforms actually accomplish all 3 and even have other functionalities. Some platforms are individual and only do one of these pieces. But there are fundamentally 6 things that we look at when we're trying to make sure we have a really strong, sustainable giving tech stack. So when you look at your sustainable giving, these are the things I want you to, technology I want you to look at. Number 1, ease of use. Can your team actually use the platform in question? I'm not saying, can a monkey do it, right? Because these platforms, if they're powerful, do have some real horsepower and require a little bit of training. But it's a loss, in my opinion, if you have to have a custom developer and there's only one person on the team, or they're outsourced or whatever, and they're the only one that knows how to use this technology. That's a red flag for me, right? So ease of use internally. The second piece is, how does it actually impact your customer or donor experience? How does this technology actually facilitate or potentially even hinder your donor's ability to give a gift, to choose to give a recurring gift, to manage that recurring gift? And so what does that donor experience look like? The third question we look at is the capability. What do you need it to do? It's so easy with technology to get lost in sort of shiny object syndrome. The question I would ask for you is, what do you need the technology to do in your case? Let's start with that and find technology that really supports what's a priority for you. So if sustainable recurring giving is a priority for you, that is an important set of capabilities you need to account for when you're choosing your technology. The fourth is scalability. Will this platform grow with you? The way I like to ask it is, if your platform is serving you well today, will it serve you at 10x your current size? Because 10x, while that might sound wild, is actually quite doable. And that's not an uncommon result when organizations focus on growing sustainable giving. So if you say today to me, Dave, part of our tech stack, yeah, it's fine today, sort of pieced together, but oh, Dave, if we had 10 times the number of donors going through the platform, it would just break. Like, or this system or this process would break. That's a red flag, right? You want it to be scalable. The fifth is integration. How does it actually integrate with other technology, other platforms? And how does that fit all together? And then the final area we look at is automation. To what extent can this technology within our stack help us to automate processes, steps, messages, even with regards to our program? And so when we look at sustainable giving, we look at those 6 things. Now, one of the things that I'm really motivated to is to really help move the entire sector forward with recurring giving. And so we've been working on something that I'm actually super excited. This is the first group that gets to hear about this publicly, is what we call our sustainable giving certification process. And I'm going to talk about that in just a minute, because I think that's going to be important to the future of our sector with sustainable giving. But the first piece and the last piece on tech that I want to talk about is really the silent killer of sustainable giving. And this is the one of the main things that I see kind of goes unseen within recurring giving, because so much of the focus is on, can we grow our program? Can we get new donors? Can we get donors to convert to recurring? The truth is, the silent killer of sustainable giving is churn. And there are 2 types of churn. And Dave hinted at it a little bit earlier when he was talking about some of the work that they do with CharityEngine. There are 2 types of churn, and these are subscription terms. There is what is known as voluntary churn and involuntary churn. In subscription terms, voluntary churn is where the donor intends to cancel their recurring gift. They've decided, either financial hardship or times have changed or whatever, they are no longer interested in participating in the program. There are some things I want to cover really quickly on voluntary churn. And then involuntary churn is due to payment failure or technical issues or processing issues, where the donor does not intend to cancel their gift, but there are issues that result in that. So when it comes to voluntary churn, just a few things. Number one, be proactive about your communication. One of the worst pieces of advice I've heard about recurring giving in the last 2 years is set it and forget it. The truth is, recurring giving today is no longer set it and forget it. It is, your donors have apps like Rocket Money that are monitoring their recurring giving. And so what are we doing to communicate impact proactively? How are we affirming our recurring donors on an ongoing basis? Then automate processes to minimize disruption. So how are we actually proactively automating our communications? Be extra careful around donor transitions, either their life transitions or you have transitions in your program. That is one of the spots where donors will often lose donors. And you can leverage data to better predict and target when donors are more likely to churn. And the reality is, donors will choose to stop giving on a recurring basis, and that's fine. But there are a couple things that we can do proactively. Number one, if somebody reaches out to cancel, acknowledge and affirm. Hey, I'm sorry to hear that. Empathize is super critical. But then also invite them, because they may not actually understand. There may be alternatives to canceling their gift that they can participate in. So it's something like, if I was on the phone right now with a donor, I'd say, hey, I'm sorry to hear that. I totally understand. You may not be aware, but we actually have a couple of options, alternatives to canceling your gift. If you would like, we can pause your gift for a couple of months, or we can lower your gift. And often that is a way to prevent that kind of voluntary churn. And then also just ask and learn, capture those reasons and learn from that. Last thing I want to cover here before we go on to our sustainable giving certification and then our little book giveaway is what do we do to prevent involuntary churn? Well, there's a couple things we can do. Number one, we can get donors ideally to choose a more stable giving payment type. And EFT and ACH giving is much higher retention and lower churn than equivalent credit card. And so what can we do to invite people to actually sign up for giving through that EFT or ACH? Leveraging credit and debit card auto updaters. This last year, just a few months ago, I got the dreaded package in the mail from my bank, and I knew what it meant. It meant, guess what? Who's getting a new credit card and a new credit card number because whatever fraud had happened, And so I got a new credit card, and it was very interesting. I intentionally did not reach out to the charities that we support on a monthly basis just to see what would happen. And there were actually two charities that auto updated to the new credit card number because of the relationship they had with their payment processor and with their donation platform. And so they didn't even need to ultimately communicate to me because they were able to actually auto update that. Retrying failed payments. There are various reasons why a specific payment might fail, and making sure that there's ability to do what are often known as smart retries, automating messages to donors, and then conducting outreach to donors for failed payments. So automating messages is great when it's like, hey, the expiration date is approaching, and if you can't auto update, inviting donors to update. But then also there are donors that for whatever reason just don't get around to it, or they don't see the message. And so actually just doing good old manual outreach to donors to invite them to reactivate their gift is a key. Okay, so I mentioned our sustainable giving certification. One of the things, as we've seen the traction with sustainable giving this last year, that I've been very passionate about is that if we're able to reach the 1.1 million nonprofits in the US today that represent those charities that have been really left behind with regards to recurring giving, but if the technology that they're on or the service providers that they are working with are not bringing best practice, modern, sustainable giving practices, then we'll have won the hearts and minds of charity leaders everywhere, but lost the vision because the mission stalls if you don't have technology and service providers that are actually equipped and bringing you the best practices. And so that's a passion of mine. And so we've developed what we call the Sustainable Giving Certification, which is an independently verified outside audit, essentially, of technology and service providers to ensure that we're shining a light on the best in breed, the organizations that are really focused on helping nonprofits grow sustainable giving. And so it thrills me to actually share that the team at CharityEngine was one of the first teams that actually raised their hand and said, hey, we want to be a part of this. Like, we are invested in sustainable giving in this sector. The background of the team at CharityEngine actually goes back to recurring payments and understanding that. And so they were one of the first groups to raise their hand and say, we want to be a part of this. And so I'm thrilled to share today that they are one of our Sustainable Giving founding certified partners, and highly encourage checking out what they're doing. In fact, one of the things that the team told me as we got ready for this presentation is that one of their technologies, which is known as Sustainer IQ, which I highly recommend taking a look. I believe there's going to be a link that we're going to send out that you'll get access to. Sustainer IQ is actually their smart, intelligent platform for growing and retaining revenue from recurring giving. And so it's the credit card auto updater that you and I talked about. It's the AI-powered retries. It's the automated reactivation system. And so The team is so committed to this sector that they actually guarantee customers a 90% monthly donation collection rate. And the cool thing about, for those of you that are here today, is one of the things they've agreed to do. Typically, Sustainer IQ is an add-on or a feature that you can turn on and use with them. But anybody who signs up today for a demo, they are willing and have graciously agreed to actually offer Sustainer IQ at no additional cost. And so, thanks to the CharityEngine team for not only already standing with sustainable giving, but for really investing in this sector and making this possible. So I mentioned the audiobook of The Rise of Sustainable Giving came out just a week ago on the 1-year anniversary of the print book. And I don't know about you, but I am an audiobook guy. And so we are super excited to actually offer a giveaway today of 100 copies to folks who sign up. And the other piece that I mentioned that we've actually put together is a self-assessment. So if you're listening to today and you're like, awesome, this is super helpful, but I want to go deeper. If you want to take a look at your own program, we've put together a sustainable giving self-assessment that we would love to send to you. And it's about 30 questions, takes just 7 minutes. I timed it. And it actually walks you through 4 core areas of your program. Even the questions, I'm told, are helpful for thinking about what is our program, where are we at, how might we grow. And so we've put that together. It's completely free. There's no cost. And so if you're interested, you can go to just imago.consulting/AFP Global 2026. We'll drop a link in the chat. Hopefully you can grab it as it scrolls by. You can also just scan the QR code. I'll leave that up for a second. And just make sure that everybody has a chance to grab that. And again, we'll do the drawing from the folks who have the opportunity to do this, as well as send additional information. So you'll have that. Okay, let's make sure everybody's got it. And then I want to share just a few final comments as we wrap up. Okay, I think everybody's got it. Okay, so what's changed in philanthropy? The number one thing I want you to take away from today is accessibility. Recurring giving is more accessible to more charities than at any other time in history, and that includes your charity. And I don't say that lightly. The reality is every category that we talked about earlier is able to actually tap into ongoing, strong, recurring giving like no other category before. I mentioned rescue missions. We just did a meeting with one of the rescue missions that we're working with, and this rescue mission saw an 11-to-1 return on their recurring giving program growth in just the last 6 months. And so this is something that is more accessible to more charities than at any other time in history. Where to focus now? Own it. How do you create ownership within your organization? And by the way, for many of you, that's you. Like, I'm talking to the person who owns it or should own it. Prioritize it. How do we actually show our donors that this is a priority for us? Is it relegated to one time a year, one pocket of our presence, or are we actually prioritizing it? Make it visible. Make recurring giving visible to your organization. We need to move beyond this sort of standard assumption that the default giving type is one time. And by the way, I love one-time gifts. I've raised one-time gifts for 22 years. But we don't need to always default to that. We need to help people to see that ongoing sustainable giving creates an impact that lasts far beyond any one-time gift can. And we want to understand where we are today. And so if you take one thing from today, especially if you're in that exploring or get started stage, capture where you're at today. Benchmark that, how many donors we have now and how much. And then think about how technology can help, because the reality is a sustainable giving tech stack can help you scale your recurring giving program. And I want you to be able to not have technology get in the way as you're executing on that growth. At the end of the day, this represents $119 billion over the next decade. And as I said before, this is not a trend that is coming and I'm saying, hey, everybody pay attention to this trend that's coming. This is a trend that's here today. This is a trend that is going to be with us candidly for the next many decades, and is an opportunity that more charities have the chance to take advantage of. And so recurring giving is more accessible to more charities than at any other time in human history. And the question is, are you going to take advantage of it? And so I hope this was helpful for you today. It's super fun to see you all. I hope to connect at AFB Icon. Don't ever hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. And again, special thanks to the folks at CharityEngine for the work that they've done, not only to create a platform that is sustainable giving forward, but also to bring education like today and to really invest in the sector. And so just grateful to be here. And I hope everybody has a wonderful day and that you are able to move forward in your mission as you lead forward. Thanks.
Hey, Dave, we still have a little bit of time for questions. If you wanted to go over, we have those in the Zoom
Awesome.
chat.
Perfect. I see some questions in the Zoom chat. So let's go ahead and cut to those if you're able to stick around with us. So first question that we see is actually a question for Dave Martin, if we can get him on, is how does CharityEngine integrate with Salesforce, with other platforms? Just talk a little bit about CharityEngine as a platform, Dave.
Yes, excuse me. Yeah, we have a robust library of APIs that we integrate with multiple platforms. So we're an all-in-one. We can do all of it in the platform, but if you need an integration, we have web APIs and no problem integrating with many of the platforms in the industry. Some out of the box, but mostly depending on the complexity of the integration, you might do through APIs.
That's great. One of the other questions is how others define recurring giving. This individual says we refer to anyone who gives 4 or more gifts a year. Should it be only monthly? The way I prefer to define recurring giving is anytime the donor has made an actual commitment to a recurring gift. So often that is automated because it's a credit card transaction or an EFT transaction. Some organizations I know will say, well, we receive a check from this sort of person, most months, right? Well, but if they don't have a pledge commitment, that can be a slippery slope and a little bit harder to measure. So I'm a big fan of measuring anytime he's made an ongoing commitment to recurring giving. And that actually might be, to the person who mentioned this, that might be a quarterly recurring gift. And that's fine. That's 4 times a gift. There are 4 times a year. There are actually some charities that are experimenting with an annual recurring gift, like, hey, I give every, fall. Would you consider an annual recurring gift? And it actually is an automated annual gift. And so that's how I would suggest as you think about defining recurring giving. One of the next questions is we don't have a strong sustainable giving journey, but we do have a membership program that includes benefits. All right, I get you. Our team is thinking about creating a monthly program like the PBS model. How can we create 2 separate, distinct programs? That is a great question, and there's a lot of potential detail under this, but I'll answer at a high level. Once again, when it comes to sustainable giving, we don't generally, most of the time, want to make it a consumer style subscription where you're going to get access to all these cool things, and we're essentially trying to sell monthly giving. There are some rare exceptions, by the way, and so you may want to message me separately. Some charities actually do have a value-added program, and it literally is a subscription that happens to be to a nonprofit. But for the most part, you want to make sure that your recurring giving program is as altruistic as possible. And so my recommendation would be to really understand what is the value proposition of your subscription, if you have a subscription/membership. What is the value proposition there? And then if there is a separate recurring giving program, what is the value proposition there? And how are those 2 things different? One of the things I talk about in the book is the question we're always trying to answer with an ongoing value proposition comes from my friends at Next After. And that question is, why should I give to your organization now rather than some other organization or not at all? And I unpack that in some other settings. We won't have time to unpack that here, but that's the question I would suggest you consider answering. I see a question here. Language matters. I know you refer to sustainers rather than donors or supporters. Can you speak to your choice to use sustainer? So I've used a lot of language today. Recurring donors is the technical term that most people in the U.S. Use. If we were in Europe, I would say regular donors, which is sort of the like nerdy technical terms. But I prefer sustainers because the donors are actually sustaining the mission of the organization, and so there's kind of a double meaning there in the sense that sustainers are giving on a sustainable basis, but they are also providing sustainability for us. And so, recurring, sort of the tech term, the appropriate tech term. What you didn't notice me today generally say is monthly donors. The reality is not all recurring donors are monthly, as we just talked about. Some are quarterly, some are annual. And we want donors to give in whatever way is comfortable for them and whatever fits them. And so the reality is I don't use the language of monthly donors because that's not what recurring donors always are. Just a couple other questions as far as the time we have here. One question, easy one. What was the name of the book? It's called The Rise of Sustainable Giving. In fact, we'll just bring it back up here for folks that are looking for that. So it's called The Rise of Sustainable Giving. It's available on all platforms, Amazon, Audible, Barnes & Noble, all that stuff. Next question was, how does stewardship differ between one-time and recurring donors? What approaches do you find are effective with recurring donors? Couple thoughts on that. First, in terms of stewardship of one-time and recurring donors, when it comes to a one-time donor, the first thing we want to do, especially with that first gift, is we want to affirm the donor. We want to help them see how their gift made a difference, and we want to make them feel great about their first gift. But the difference is with a one-time donor, that's where I do move into then moving from affirmation to invitation. How do we go from affirming that donor to then inviting them to an ongoing impact? Because they obviously are making an impact. They obviously care about the mission of the organization, but what can we do to actually invite them to an ongoing impact? One of the other things that we talk about with regards to stewarding recurring donors is one of the mistakes. I see organizations make one of two mistakes when it comes to what communications they send to recurring donors. One mistake I often see is they send recurring donors basically nothing. They remove them from all communications because there's this sense of like, oh, they're a recurring donor. We don't want to mess with that. Let's not send them anything, let's not send them newsletters. Let's not send them appeals. Well, if you can imagine, that's a pretty easy mistake to spot because then you're actually just not communicating to those donors except in those few cases. So we don't want to do that. But the other mistake I see organizations make is they send them everything. Like there is no differentiation in the messaging between a single gift donor and a recurring donor. And for some of you charities, you might be sending 12, 14, 18, 20 appeals a year, depending on the organization. That's not the right way to treat a recurring donor. And so what we do is we work with organizations to help identify what is the right cadence of communications. We do want to ask. I mentioned the recurring donors are some of the most generous additional givers that we have, but we also don't want to push that boundary too much. And so we want to make sure we're stewarding. And then the last thing I'll say on stewardship of recurring donors is what does it look like to create peak moments for your donors? And there are ways that we can actually engage and create really powerful peak moments for donors, depending on the organization. So, for example, one charity we worked with that actually historically has done a major donor, call it a vision trip, to go see the work that they do and have people that are kind of insiders be able to really kind of get exposed to the work on the ground. This charity we worked with, I was just talking to the executive director, and he actually decided this last year to invite their sustainers to the vision trip. So the reality was the vast majority of sustainers were not going to, come and pay their own way to go on a vision trip. But I believe just that invitation was powerful because they were invited to be an insider. Second thing happened, and he had just told me this a few weeks ago. He said we actually had a couple of our sustainers, but one in particular decided to come on the trip. They flew over to see the work that this charity does. And this donor, who is $100 a month donor, who got the invitation, decided to actually come on that trip, had a peak experience, came home. As I talked to my colleague over there just a couple of weeks ago, he said, we just received a check in the mail from that donor, $100 a month donor, for $100,000. Turns out that this $100 a month donor was a part of a family foundation and had no clue the depth of the work that this organization did. But because they thought about how do we create a peak experience for our sustainers, invited sustainers to this trip they already had, wasn't additional work, so to speak, and ultimately received a $100,000 gift, a new relationship, and a peak moment for this donor who has had their life really positively impacted. And so some of you don't do vision trips. Some of you, it's the live event that you do. If you do a gala, we just recorded a webinar with the team on talking about what is happening with live events and how we can make peak experiences. So there's a lot of opportunities in that space. So I hope that's helpful as you think about growing recurring giving for your organization. And just do a quick time check with our hosts here. And we'll see if we have time for maybe one more question.
Yeah, you're good. You can ask another question.
Okay, let's wrap up with this question. Let's pick a good one. All right. Dave Martin, not to put you on the spot, but have you seen a question that you think is really worth calling out?
There wasn't one that, I don't know how many were left here. There wasn't one that jumped out to me.
Okay. Let's do let's do this one. Can you share how a very small nonprofit, we're celebrating 25 years, congratulations by the way, can prioritize recurring giving programs, pledge programs, donor stewardship, and segmentation when it's difficult to also balance event planning, community awareness, social media, supporting our services, etc. I am out of breath even just reading your question, and I get it because, and like I said, the vast the mix of charities we work with is all over the place. So I think the first thing I would say, if you're a small nonprofit, a couple things. Number one, if I were a small or new, you're not new, but if I was a small nonprofit today and I was looking at building funding, there'd be two primary focuses, depending on the cause. But for the most part, there'd be two ways I would look to build my funding. Number one, major gifts, mid and major gifts. And number two, sustainable recurring giving. Because if you think about it, number one, those are the two fastest growing types of giving today. The reality is the generosity crisis is real, and there are fewer donors giving more to charities. So there are donors that are sitting on donor advised funds. There are donors that are looking to actually make a bigger impact in charities. And then the second thing is I would prioritize recurring giving because this is a sustainable funding mechanism. And I would encourage you to check out, we actually just, the last episode we posted of the Sustainable Giving podcast was with an interview with Eddie Collar, who is an organization that we've worked with at the Wesley Foundation of TCU, Texas Christian University. And when Eddie and I met, they had 8 recurring donors. And Eddie is the executive director and basically the does everything person. He had one other staff member and then a couple board members to help him. And Eddie tells the story of how over the last 6 months, they have not only nearly tripled their recurring giving, but he started January 1st. I was talking to him and he said, over the last 6 months, Dave, we've built annual recurring revenue such that I'm starting January 1st with 25% of my budget funded on day one. And that's the transformation I think about that is possible for charities and charity leaders. And that is the transformation that I think is possible for all charities. So if you have 5,000 recurring donors, this is good news for you. If you have 5 or 0, this is also good news for you. So I empathize with the load. I think Eddie does give some clues to leveraging board members and working with, volunteers and interns and different things like that. But really, he started with belief and then moved into action. And there were just a few key things that he prioritized in their schedule that ultimately helped him start to lead that growth. So I hope that's helpful. And I hope this time has been helpful. Again, you'll have my email. If you have any questions that are following up, we will do the drawing and get those books out to you, audiobooks out to you. If you are interested in CharityEngine and the work they're doing, absolutely make sure to sign up and do a demo. And thanks to them for the generosity, not only of just giving away the books, but also offering your Sustainer IQ functionality at really no cost for folks who sign up.
Man, Dave, thanks so much for doing the webinar. It's been awesome to have you and work with you again, and we'll continue our partnership. And thanks to AFP for making this possible.
Wonderful. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
On behalf of AFP Global, I'd like to thank you for your participation in today's webinar live stream. Please take a moment to complete our survey, which helps us program future events. Please join us for our next webinar, Exploring and Demystifying Donor-Advised Funds, made possible through the support of the AFP Foundation for Philanthropy, US, on February 25th at 1 p.m. Eastern. This concludes today's stream. Thank you and have a great day.